Welcome to the Raku firing process and Japanese tea ceremony art lesson. This is a recording for the Stephen F. Austin State University Art Education YouTube channel. And so today what you're going to learn about is the process of Raku firing as it's practiced all around the world in modern times, and quite a bit in America. But also you're going to learn the history of where this process comes from and the traditions that it is a part of. And so what you should know about is the history of the Japanese tea ceremony, because this is where this Raku firing process began. The tea ceremony is an example of the importance that Japanese culture has for art and life combined. And so the Japanese tea ceremony is an important part of modern Japanese culture, but it has been a part of the Japanese culture for hundreds of years. The practice of performing a tea ceremony is one that is steeped in tradition, and that tradition insists that the setting of the ceremony, the utensils that are used, and the people who are invited are all extremely important, and there are a lot of rules and traditions that go into this tea ceremony. This tea ceremony has been practiced for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's thought that it began back in the 9th century in Japan. The attendants there'll be several people who are invited to a tea ceremony, but in every tea ceremony, there's always one honored guest. The honored guest is going to be the first person who is served, and then also there is a tea bowl that is made by the host in anticipation of this tea ceremony that will be given to the honored guest. The tea bowl is generally small, and it's made from a pinched pot. In this example, you can see there's a foot at the bottom of it, and that it is pretty rustic looking. The host will make this in anticipation of the tea ceremony happening. So the host will make the tea bowl, and then they'll also fire it. Now, once that bowl has been formed, they'll fire it in a Raku kiln. And the whole time that the host is making that Raku bowl, or that tea bowl, they have the very special honored guest in mind. The teacup is used in the tea ceremony and is made especially for that honored guest. Also, there are really very strict rules and traditions that are followed throughout the entire ceremony. The tea room or the tea house, it can be either one. Some people do have tea houses, is also decorated according to those rules and those traditions. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the word Wahby and also its meaning. It means the perfection of imperfection. It's an idea that the Japanese revere, and it has taken on more and more meaning and been more refined as the years go by. But what it mostly means is that there's beauty in all things, and Wahby is the idea of looking for beauty in things like poverty, imperfection, mystery, the things that we may not ever understand, asymmetry rather than symmetry, austerity, which means having only a few things, but having those things be beautiful. And this sort of idea about beauty and a way of living really reflects the Japanese idea in the present day. Now, once the host created the pot and it had dried enough, it would be time to fire it so that the pot that's made out of clay could change into ceramic and then be used for the tea ceremony. If it was just clay and it had never been fired, you couldn't drink tea out of it. So it has to be fired, and it has to be fired to something over 1,000 degrees. Long, long time ago, when this first started, a lot of times the host would dig a hole in the side of a hill or a mountain and then put the pot inside that hole and start a wood fire in there and keep firing it until it reached the right temperature and it turned from clay into ceramics. They would also use oxides like iron oxide or cobalt or copper oxides and use those oxides and apply them to the surface of the clay pot so that when it was fired, it would have decorations on it. Today, we use special Raku kilns, and these kilns are usually gas powered, and the temperature is better regulated. However, you don't really need a lot of special equipment for that. You can see that this Raku kiln is sitting just right on top of a platform. These are all fire bricks because we don't want anything breaking or catching on fire. And then it is also this basket is where the pots will be, is just made out of not very expensive wire. The thing that you may not, that most people don't have, and that is specialized, is this white area between the wires, and that is a fire blanket, and it will withstand temperatures of well over 1,000 degrees. So when we heat that inside of that basket with all the pots in it, that fiber blanket will keep all of that heat in and it won't catch on fire. So this is just a video of just before we started the Raku process. And I'm just going to walk you through all of the steps that, that we took in order to and to get started. And I'll introduce you a little bit to the Raku process for firing. So on the day that we did this Raku firing that you're going to see all of the different steps in, it was a really beautiful day. It was about 50 degrees, and you need it to be kind of cool because the Raku process can be pretty hot. When I made this video, we had already started to heat up the kiln, and we were just waiting for it to get to the right temperature. And you can see inside that those pots that are in there are just glowing. It's probably about 700 or 800 degrees. We're going to take those pots while they're really hot and we're going to put them in this trash can with combustible items like wood shavings and ripped up paper, and then we'll take it out of that can and put it into this bucket with water to cool it off. All of that temperature change is pretty tough on those pots. And I don't take them out with my bare hands, obviously. I take them out with those tongs. Now, the kiln uses gas, and I'm just going to show you what that looks like right there. This is the nozzle, and it's actually hooked up to a gas tank that we put on the other side of that wall. We felt like that might be the safest place to have it. And so you can see that the propane tank is hooked up back there, and it feeds into this, and we've got it blowing in there pretty strong. And at this point, we're just waiting for the pots to be hot enough to take them out and for the glaze to develop. Here, you're going to see my husband open the kiln for me, and you're going to get an idea of how hot those pots actually are when we open the kiln. Now, obviously, he's turned the gas off because that would be dangerous to have it on. And I'm going to use these tongs to take the pots out. But this is what it looks like when you open a kiln when it is right around 900 to 1,000 degrees. And you can see that pots are just glowing. They're almost translucent. And when the pottery, when that cold air hits that pottery, it's kind of hard on the pots a little bit. And you'll see later what happens to some of them. So the kiln is going to be fired to about 900 to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're going to notice that we lifted the lid, and that's what those pots look like. They almost look molten when you lift the lid. And then we're going to use the tongs to take those pots out and put them into the trash can. Now, the cool part about this is when I put it in the trash can, you're going to see that the pots are so hot that they set all of the combustible materials in the trash can on fire. So I've got my tongs, and you'll see also that I'm wearing welding gloves. They actually make small welding gloves. So those fit me perfectly. And I'm just going to take one pot at a time and put it into the combustible material. Now these wood shavings are actually a little bit more wet than we would like them to be. So they're going to produce a lot of smoke, and they don't stay on fire as much as we'd like. So we had to add newspaper later. But you can kind of see how as soon as those pots hit that combustible material, that they automatically set everything in there on fire. That's because they're so hot. And I'm putting the wood shavings on top of them to sort of reduce the amount of oxygen that's inside that trash can. So yeah, that's exactly right. We're going to take those pots out of a very hot kiln with tongs, and we're going to put them into a trash can. And then once everything catches on fire and that fire's had a chance to burn a little bit, we're going to put the lid on. Now what that does is it creates what's called a reduction atmosphere. So the firing atmosphere is the air or the atmosphere within the kiln or within the area where the pots are currently firing, or where their glazes are being developed. So in this case, the reduction is happening in the trash can with combustible materials. So a reduction is a term for one type of firing for the atmosphere, and then oxidation is a term for another kind of firing. So what do you think that the terms reduction and oxidation mean when it comes time to put very hot pots into a trash can with combustible materials, but then put the lid on it? Well, you know, when you put the lid on it, the fire is going to go out, right? So what kind of atmosphere do you think the Raku process uses? Well, the correct answer is reduction, and I'm going to explain what those two terms mean. During a glaze firing, pottery will heat to very high temperatures. Those temperatures react with the chemicals, and that's how those glazes are developed. In oxidation firing, usually what you will have is an electric fire. There's no fuel. If you are doing a fuel-fired firing, then that fuel means that there's going to be a fire, and fire needs a fuel, some sort of a substance to burn, like gas or wood chips or paper, but it also needs something else. Do you know what it is? In a reduction fire, you are reducing the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. So when I put the lid on that trash can as the fire is burning, I am reducing the amount of oxygen available to that fire. And what it will do is it will keep burning, keep burning, keep burning until all of the oxygen molecules have been burned up. And those oxygen molecules are not just in the air, they're not just in the wood shavings or the paper, they're also in the clay body and in the glazes. And when you pull that oxygen out of the clay body and the glazes, it changes them into looking differently. So now you know what a reduction fire is, and that's what we're doing here. Once the pots have reduced, and what that means is I've put them in this trash can and I've allowed it to burn, the materials in there to burn with a limited amount of oxygen for about 20 minutes. So almost all of the oxygen inside that trash can is gone. And remember, we're talking about molecules, so there'll be some still left in there. Sometimes if you pull the lid off, the fire will just burst right back up because everything didn't get burned. And so you just have to be really careful. So once I have reduced it, and I've left those pots in for about 20 minutes, and most of the combustible items have been burned, then I'm going to take those pots out of the trash can and put them into this bucket. And I'm going to actually cool them with water. I'm going to spray water on them until the temperature of the clay body cools down enough to where I can wash them off and handle them with bare hands. So you can see that I've pulled the lid off and it's still kind of burning. And remember, I told you that the materials that we had in there were still a little moist, so there was a lot of smoke. But I'm going to put all 3 of the pots that you saw me put in there, I'm going to take all of those out and put them into the bucket one at a time. And because the wood shavings were a little bit moist, we have still some paper left over from that didn't burn, and we're just going to pull that out of the bucket. It's not a big deal. And so then once we do that, we're going to get the water hose and we're going to start spraying those pots down. And you can see that that it's really, really smoky, and it's kind of hard for me to work with all that smoke. So I'm going to put the lid back on the trash can. I don't need my tongs anymore. And I'm just going to get the hose and I'm just going to spray them down. Now what you're going to see when I start spraying it is all of that steam. That is what happens, right? When water heats up, it turns to a gas, steam. And so now you can see that when the water hits these pots, it automatically turns to steam. And so it's steaming up. Now there's quite a bit of thermal shock going on here. So you really have to make sure that your pots are nice and strong when you do a process like this. In modern times, we have several choices of how we would put, what kind of glazes we would put on that. The ones that I used on this particular day were all metallic. They all have this sort of metallic sheen to them. But you can use no glaze and your pot will turn black. And then also you can use a white glaze that usually will, the surface of the glaze will crack and inside those cracks will be black, just like the rest of your pot. And this white glaze is not metallic at all, but so you can add colorants to it like a copper carbonate and have it turn green, or cobalt and have it turn blue. But this is a white, just a regular white glaze. Now I want to show you what my pots looked like as we were done. And I actually put them on the stairs in the order of how successful they are. And I started with the least successful pot. So you can see that this least successful pot the glaze had some real serious problems. It bubbled quite a bit. There's a lot of pitting, and so it's not what you would call a successful fire. This next one had the same green glaze on it. It had the same bubbling and pitting, but it also had a different glaze on it that was pretty successful in that area. This pot was extremely successful. It had less pitting. It had green glaze was a little bit more attractive, and it had this really beautiful pink interior to the bowl. And I hadn't scrubbed this black off, so when I did that, it even turned more pink. This is a beautiful bowl, but the body of the bowl was not successful because I have really big, serious cracks inside, all along that bowl. I hadn't scrubbed it because I was afraid it would fall apart, but you can see how there's really nice pinks and caramel colors in that one. Same thing goes for this one. Really nice glaze. Even the green glaze turned out pretty good, but there's some really serious cracks in that one. And the inside of the bowl is that beautiful pink. Now, when I was making this pot on the wheel, I actually made a gouge in the side of it on accident, and I sort of went with it. You can see that this pot is really beautiful. It's got some really beautiful pinks and flashes, and it's very metallic. And then on the crack, on this sort of gouge that I did, I put wax in there so no glaze would get on it, and then it would turn black when I fired it. This pot, I think, is the most successful. It's really beautiful. And the inside, you see the really nice pinks on the outside and the very metallic flashes. And then on the inside, you've got this really beautiful caramel sort of glaze. And notice how shiny and metallic it is. This pot is actually very successful. It had a lid. It was a little ginger jar, but I dropped the lid. I dropped another lid, and then I dropped a pot as well. So I lost 3 things. But this one has several different glazes on it, and it is actually very successful. But now here is your extra credit question. And I'm not going to give you the answer. You're going to have to find out. Why on this very brown clay, that's what color the clay is, why is the part that I didn't put glaze on, why is that black? So I want to review what we've learned today. We've learned about the fact that the Raku firing process began with the Japanese tea ceremony way back in 900 BC, I'm sorry, 80. And the tea ceremony is steeped in tradition. There are a lot of rules and traditions that must be followed. The utensils are have to be a certain thing, like a tea cup that's made by the host, and it is designed with the honored guest in mind. You can see that the process of Raku firing is it has very beautiful results. And now, today, in modern times, people are using the Raku firing method all around the world, and they have adapted it to very modern practices. I've also given you some resources so that if you are interested in the Raku process, that you can learn more about it. And there's a really good chance that somebody who lives near you has a Raku kiln and does Raku firing. And sometimes even schools will do it. And so you might actually get to experience a Raku firing. So I hope you have enjoyed this lesson, and I hope that you continue to learn about Raku firing.